Well, let's discuss all of this with Daniel Levy, who joins me here in London. He's the president of the US Middle East Project. Daniel, welcome back to the show. Let me start on really what we were discussing at the top of the show. And there seems to be a disconnect between what we are hearing from the White House and what we are hearing from Netanyahu camp. This time yesterday, we were told that they were working feverishly, the US and France, on this 21-day ceasefire deal. Now we're hearing that the White House is unable to explain the Netanyahu disconnect. Why? I mean, does that... First of all, what do you make of those developments? And what does that tell you about the state of the relationship between both sides?
Well, what we heard last night, and it's on the White House website, is the senior administration officials brief the press and they say, we've worked really hard, we've got the breakthrough, the moment's come, and the governments, the Lebanese and Israeli government, will announce it in their own way. OK, fast forward to now, as you say, what has gone on? And it's easy to go to the place which says, you know, Netanyahu just takes enjoyment in demeaning and embarrassing this White House. But I think there's another way of looking at it, which is he feels he so has them where he wants them after so many months where they have failed to exert any pressure that Netanyahu could treat something which the White House works to bring its G7 allies, works to bring its Gulf allies. It really puts itself out there, and he can treat this as a trial balloon. Because I think for Netanyahu, it's possible that this option was a decent option. So
you don't believe that Netanyahu is interested at all, and the signs that we've gotten so far is that they're not behind this plan. At least we look at some of the far right members, Smotrich, and they don't want the 21-day ceasefire. They want to continue plough on. You don't believe that Netanyahu's interested at all in the ceasefire plan, because does that bring them any closer to their goal of bringing their 60,000 Israelis back?
Well, it doesn't. And so what you could say is Netanyahu may have been leading the Americans on a merry dance. But I do want to entertain the idea that Netanyahu looks at this and he knows Hezbollah have been degraded, but perhaps he's not drinking his Kool-Aid. Maybe he is, but perhaps he understands that degraded is not incapacitated. And the Israeli home front is going to take a serious hit and will probably continue to do so. And therefore, he won't be able to return the 60,000 plus who have abandoned Israel's north. And he will find himself dragged into a ground incursion, which is what the Israelis are talking about. And perhaps he understands that that ground incursion is where the equation, the balance begins to shift again against Israel. And that in that scenario, the rules of asymmetric warfare, which work against the Israeli side, we've seen that in Gaza. We've seen not only the hit to the military, Israel's doesn't have an endless reserve of troops, the hit to the economy, outflight of capital we're reading about now. So for those reasons, maybe he would entertain this, but if he has a whiff that it causes him too much of a domestic problem, he walks it back. It could pass domestically. It's just worth noting that ideologically, his government is committed to the ethnic cleansing, the displacement, the destruction of Palestinians. That stuff doesn't have to apply to Lebanon. It can, but it didn't have to.
And what we are seeing play out in Lebanon and really in Gaza, it's kind of we've been seeing kind of a split screen in many ways at the United Nations, with several leaders, many Western leaders, is probably you are seeing focusing on Ukraine. Not all of them, some of them are bringing in the Middle East, but mostly in Ukraine, and some of the global South and those from Arab countries focusing on what is happening in the Middle East. I want to play some sound because that really shows the divisions within the United Nations. Let's listen to this.
The attacks of October 7th on Israeli civilians last year were condemned by countries all over the world, including Jordan. But the unprecedented scale of terror unleashed on Gaza since that day is beyond any justification.
In Gaza, not only children are dying, but also the United Nations system. The values that the West claims to defend are dying. The truth is dying. The hopes of humanity to live in a more just world are dying one by one.
The blatant aggression against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip today is the most barbaric, heinous, and widespread aggression, and a violation of humanitarian values and international conventions and norms. This is not a war in international relations in its well-known and common concept. Rather, it is a crime of genocide using the latest weapons against the people.
I refuse to choose between Hamas terrorism or the massacre and genocidal behavior of Netanyahu's Israel. We don't have to choose between barriers. I choose humanity.
And there are plenty more, even from South America and Latin America. I wonder, as we hear from some of these leaders, what that tells you about, one, the Security Council and the need for reform, but also the failure of diplomacy, the failure of leadership right now.
And unfortunately, so much of that does come back to what we've been discussing, which is the US. And we will probably in the future learn this example of the Biden administration, Secretary Blinken, McGurk, Sullivan, as maybe a low point in the failure of American statecraft, American weakness, but people legitimately, I think, questioning what is America's real interest? Is this what they wanted to happen? And
is there leverage waning, you think, with Israel in the world? How do you make sense of that? Because one guest was saying to me yesterday that they haven't applied the pressures they could have applied with Israel. And this is something you and I have spoken about. How do you assess that?
There's two things here. Absolutely, they haven't. Absolutely. Today, in fact, the Israeli Defense Ministry says thanks for another $5.2 billion in defense aid. So what do you expect Netanyahu to do when he knows he has you exactly where he wants you? So A, they haven't used that pressure. But B, the rest of the world looks at this, and not only do they say, you are selective, not normative, don't come to us and tell us you have to align on international law. Look at what the International Court of Justice has said. Look at the arrest warrants requested by the International Criminal Court. But the international community outside, the Global South and others, also look at a weak America. An America that can't control its allies. And this ally, in particular here, Israel, has gone off a cliff. I think people legitimately would say this is a nuclear-armed state that has gone rogue, and rather than rein it in, you are continuing to encourage it up the ladder. The US Navy has 6 warships in the Eastern Mediterranean. The moral hazard lesson that sends to Israel, that if you want to do what you want to the Palestinians and remove the constraints of the axis of resistance, Iran and Hezbollah, then America is there liable to be dragged in to this war.
Daniel, really appreciate it. I mean, I was reading analysis by Alan Pincus exactly on this. Quote, if anyone wants to read it, America's exasperation when Netanyahu came too late. And it talks a lot about this and that kind of frustration.
Exasperation isn't a policy, is it, Issa?
No, it's not. Daniel, always great to see you. Thank you very much.